My name is Rebecca Marrero, and I am 30 years old. I never imagined I'd be the kind of person who could trace the collapse of her family peace back to a single quiet sentence spoken on an ordinary night. Before everything unraveled, my life felt almost boring in the best way, predictable, safe. Jake and I had been together for 5 years, married for 2, and if you'd asked anyone in my family, they would have told you I'd married the golden standard of husbands. Jake was charming, without trying warm, without being overbearing, the kind of man who remembered birthdays and helped clear dishes without being asked. My parents adored him, my friends trusted him, and I loved him with a certainty that made me feel grounded, like no matter what else shifted in the world, we were solid. That illusion lasted right up until the night Jake decided to be honest. We were sprawled on the couch legs, tangled some forgettable show murmuring in the background. It was one of those evenings that barely registers in memory until something stains it permanently. Jake muted the TV and said casually, "Hey, there's something I should probably tell you." The tone alone made my stomach tighten. Anyone who's been in a long-term relationship knows that sentence never precedes good news. He told me he had dated Sarah briefly years ago before he ever met me. Sarah, my brother, Alex's new girlfriend. The woman who had slid so easily into our family that it felt like she'd always been there. At first, I didn't react. People have pasts. I wasn't naive enough to believe Jake materialized into adulthood untouched by previous relationships. What caught me off guard wasn't the information, it was the request that followed. Jake asked me not to tell Alex, or anyone. He said it quickly, like he was hoping to slip it past me before I could question it. It was a long time ago, he insisted. Nothing serious. I just don't want to make things awkward. I remember staring at him, trying to understand why something so insignificant needed to be hidden. If it truly meant nothing, why treat it like a secret worth protecting? But Jake looked uncomfortable in a way I wasn't used to seeing, and I convinced myself that this was just one of those harmless omissions couples make to avoid unnecessary drama. I agreed. I told myself it was loyalty. Marriage meant choosing your partner even when things felt a little off. The thing is, once a secret enters your life, it doesn't stay quiet. It sits there watching everything you do. A few weeks passed, and on the surface, nothing changed. Sarah came over often with Alex, laughing at my dad's jokes, helping my mom in the kitchen like she'd done it 1,000 times. She was easy to like, bright, warm, and effortlessly affectionate with Alex. If Jake hadn't told me about their history, I would have never suspected they'd even met before. Jake was polite, relaxed, maybe a little quieter than usual, but nothing that screamed guilt. Slowly, I let myself believe I'd made the right call by keeping my mouth shut. Then came the dinner, where Sarah started talking about her past. We were all sitting around Alex's table, half-finished plates, wine glasses cluttered everywhere. Sarah was telling a story about an ex-boyfriend who was obsessed with grand gestures, always trying to impress her with ridiculous stunts. Everyone laughed, even Jake. That should have been reassuring, but something about his laughter felt forced, like he was performing normal instead of feeling it. When we got home that night, Jake admitted the story made him uncomfortable. He brushed it off as mild jealousy, said he didn't like hearing about her exes. That explanation didn't quite sit right, but I didn't push. I was already holding one secret. I didn't want to excavate another. Still, a knot began forming in my chest every time Alex and Sarah were together. I hated it. I hated the way it made me feel dishonest, even though I wasn't the one who had done anything wrong. I reminded myself that Jake asked me to keep quiet, that he was my husband, and that I was protecting the peace. But peace built on silence is fragile, and deep down I could feel it cracking. One night, Alex and Sarah came over for dinner. It was loud and warm, the kind of evening that makes you feel lucky to have family close by. Alex stepped out to take a call, leaving just me, Jake, and Sarah at the table. That's when she smiled at Jake and said almost absent-mindedly, "It's funny running into someone from your past, in such a different context." My heart slammed against my ribs. I looked at Jake. He stared down at his plate like it might swallow him whole. "Yeah," he muttered. "Small world." Sarah didn't push it. She had no idea she'd just dropped a match into gasoline. But the moment stayed with me, replaying itself long after they left. When I asked Jake about it later, he doubled down on his earlier insistence. He didn't want Alex to know. It would complicate things. He said it like a mantra, as if repeating it enough times would make it true. I asked him why, really why, but he never gave me a straight answer, just told me it was better this way. That was the night I realized I wasn't just keeping a secret, I was being kept in the dark. By the time my mom's birthday rolled around, the tension had settled into my bones. Family birthdays are a big deal in our house. Everyone together, no exceptions. The smell of food hit us before we even knocked laughter spilling out into the driveway. For a moment, standing there with Jake, I let myself pretend everything was fine. Inside, though, that quiet fear whispered, "What if something slips?" Dinner started beautifully. Stories, jokes, familiar chaos. I almost forgot about Jake and Sarah's history entirely. Almost. Then my mom suggested we go around the table and share favorite memories. It was sweet, innocent. Alex talked about how she supported him during a rough patch when he first started dating Sarah, and I felt a pang of guilt so sharp it nearly stole my breath. When Alex asked Sarah to tell her funny ex-boyfriend story, my body went cold. I watched Jake's face drain of color as Sarah laughed and launched into it. I gripped my fork so tightly my knuckles ached, silently begging the universe not to let her say his name. Fate apparently doesn't negotiate. She said it. And the room went silent in a way I'd never experienced before, like time itself had stalled, waiting to see what would happen next. In that moment, I understood something with terrifying clarity. Secrets don't stay buried. They wait. And when they surface, they do it in front of everyone who matters most. The silence after Sarah said Jake's name wasn't just awkward, it was suffocating. It pressed against my ears until I could hear my own pulse, loud and frantic, like it was trying to escape my chest. My mom froze, mid-bite her fork, hovering uselessly near her mouth. My dad's smile collapsed so quickly it felt rehearsed, like he'd practiced disappointment his whole life. Across the table, Alex stared at Sarah, then at Jake, then back at Sarah again. His expression shifting from confusion to something darker, something sharp. Jake was the first to speak, and the sound of his voice felt wrong in the stillness. He laughed a thin, nervous sound that scraped against my nerves. "Wow," he said, forcing cheer into every syllable. "What a coincidence. Guess there are a lot of Jakes out there." The words hung there flimsy and transparent, and everyone could see straight through them. Alex didn't laugh. He didn't smile. He leaned back in his chair slowly, eyes never leaving Jake's face. "You mean you?" he asked. Not angry yet, just stunned, like he was standing at the edge of a cliff and hadn't quite realized how far the drop was. Sarah's face drained of color. She opened her mouth, closed it, then finally nodded, barely perceptible. I didn't realize," she stammered. I didn't think." Her voice cracked and she looked at me for help. I had none to give. Alex turned to Jake fully now. "Is this true?" His voice was low, dangerously calm. That scared me more than if he'd started yelling. Jake shifted in his seat, glancing at me for half a second before answering. "Yeah," he said, trying again to minimize it. "But it was nothing. A long time ago. It didn't mean anything." That was the wrong thing to say. I saw it the moment the words left his mouth. Alex's jaw clenched, his hands tightening around the edge of the table. "You dated my girlfriend," he said slowly, each word heavy. "And you didn't think to tell me. You both kept this from me." His eyes flicked to me, then sharp and accusing. My throat closed instantly. I tried to speak, to explain, but Alex cut me off before I could get a word out. "Don't," he said. "Just don't." The hurt in his eyes was unmistakable now, raw and unfiltered. "What else are you hiding?" he demanded. "How long was I supposed to be the idiot here?" Sarah started crying softly, hands shaking in her lap. My mom finally found her voice, trying desperately to salvage the night. "Alex, sweetheart, please," she said. "It's my birthday. We can talk about this later." But Alex was already standing, pushing his chair back so hard it scraped loudly against the floor. The sound made me flinch. "No," he said. "We're not doing this later. I need air." He grabbed his coat, not looking at anyone, as he headed for the door. Sarah hesitated, torn between following him and staying behind. He didn't wait. The door slammed behind him, the echo reverberating through the house like a final verdict. No one spoke for a long moment. The food on our plates had gone cold, forgotten. I felt like I was watching the aftermath of an explosion in slow motion, everyone stunned, trying to process what had just happened. Jake leaned toward me and whispered, "We should go." I nodded numbly. My legs felt weak as I stood mumbling an apology to my parents that sounded hollow even to my own ears. The drive home was silent. Jake stared straight ahead, knuckles white on the steering wheel. I watched the streetlights blur past, replaying the scene over and over in my mind, wondering how I'd convince myself this secret was harmless. By the time we pulled into our driveway, I knew with absolute certainty that this was only the beginning. Whatever peace we'd had before was gone, and I had no idea how or if we could ever get it back. The days after my mom's birthday felt heavier than the night itself, like the shock had worn off and left something denser behind. Guilt, regret, a constant gnawing awareness that something fundamental between my brother and me had cracked. Alex didn't call. He didn't text. When I reached out, my messages sat there unread, a quiet punishment that somehow hurt more than if he'd yelled at me. Jake acted like we were just waiting out a storm. He needs time, he kept saying, pacing the living room or scrolling through his phone like nothing monumental had happened. Alex will cool down. The certainty in his voice irritated me more than I expected. I wanted him to look shaken to admit that what happened wasn't just uncomfortable, but devastating. Instead, he treated it like a misunderstanding that would smooth itself over if we didn't poke at it. Meanwhile, Sarah did poke at it. She sent me a long message a few days later, apologizing for blurting out Jake's name, insisting she hadn't meant to cause trouble. She said she didn't even realize Jake was my Jake when she and Alex first started dating, and by the time she figured it out, everything already felt too complicated to bring up. I believed her, at least I wanted to. None of this felt calculated on her part. Messy, yes. Painful, absolutely. But malicious, I wasn't convinced. Alex, though, didn't see it that way. A week passed before he finally picked up when I called. His voice was distant, stripped of warmth. "What do you want, Rebecca?" The sound of my name on his lips felt foreign. I swallowed hard and asked if we could meet. There was a long pause before he agreed, his reluctance thick through the line. We met at a coffee shop we used to haunt in college, the kind of place that smelled like burnt espresso and nostalgia. Sitting across from him felt surreal. He wouldn't look at me at first, focusing instead on his cup, like it held answers he wasn't ready to share. When I apologized, it came out clumsy and inadequate. I told him I thought I was protecting him, that I hadn't meant to hurt him. He finally looked up, then eyes sharp and tired. "You knew," he said, "and you didn't tell me. Do you have any idea how stupid that makes me feel?" The word stupid cut deep. I tried to explain Jake's reasoning, how he didn't want to create drama, how I'd convinced myself it was harmless. Alex scoffed. "Mission accomplished," he said flatly. "You avoided drama by lying. Great plan." There was a long silence after that, thick with everything we weren't saying. Finally, Alex sighed and leaned back in his chair. "I don't know if I can just get past this," he admitted. "Trust doesn't work like that." His honesty hurt, but it was better than the wall he'd built before. When he said he needed time, I nodded, grateful he hadn't completely shut me out. Things didn't magically improve after that. Alex would answer my texts now, but his responses were short, cautious. Jake, on the other hand, had become persona non grata. Alex didn't want to see him, didn't want to hear his name. Every family gathering that followed was tense, everyone skirting around the obvious divide like it might bite if acknowledged. I tried to convince myself that this was as bad as it would get, that the truth was out, the damage done, and now we were just navigating the aftermath. But deep down, something felt unresolved, like there was another layer to this mess we hadn't unearthed yet, and that unease stayed with me, a quiet warning that the worst of it might still be waiting. The next family dinner was inevitable. You can only dodge so many invitations before silence becomes louder than conflict, and my mom was determined to pretend we were still whole. When she called and asked us all to come over for a casual Saturday dinner, I almost said no. My chest tightened just thinking about it. But I heard the strain in her voice, the careful cheerfulness she used when she was trying to hold something together with sheer will, and I agreed. Jake and I arrived early like we always did. He helped my dad set the table. Laughed at the same old stories, played the role everyone expected him to play. From the outside, it looked like normal. From the inside, it felt like waiting for a storm you could already smell in the air. I kept glancing at the door, bracing myself. When Alex walked in with Sarah, the atmosphere shifted instantly. It wasn't dramatic, no shouting, no slammed doors, but the energy in the room tightened like a pulled wire. Alex nodded at me, polite but distant. He barely acknowledged Jake. Sarah hovered close to him, her smile, strained eyes flicking around the room like she was searching for an exit. Dinner started quietly, too quietly. Everyone stuck to safe topics, work traffic, the weather, like we were all reading from the same script. I could tell Alex was holding something in the way he barely touched his food, the way his jaw clenched every time Jake spoke. And then, just as my mom started to relax, he set his fork down. So Alex said calmly, too calmly, "Are we just going to keep pretending everything's fine?" The words landed like a dropped plate. My mom froze. My dad cleared his throat. Jake shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Alex," my mom said gently, "let's not do this tonight. We're here to eat together." "No," Alex replied. Eyes locked on Jake. "We're doing this now." He leaned forward slightly. "You lied to me," he said. "And you made her lie to me too." He gestured toward me without looking, and my stomach twisted. Jake finally met his gaze. "I didn't lie," he said, his voice tight. "I just didn't tell you." Alex laughed, once sharp and humorless. "That's the same thing." He turned to me then, and that hurt more than anything else. "You're my sister," he said. "You should have told me no matter what he asked." I felt myself shrink under his words. "I thought I was protecting you," I said quietly. "I didn't want to hurt you." His expression softened for half a second, just enough to give me hope. Then it hardened again. "You weren't protecting me," he said. "You were protecting him." The room went completely still. Even Sarah looked like she was barely breathing. Jake opened his mouth, then closed it like he finally understood there was no argument left to make. "You're right," he said, after a long pause. "I was selfish. I didn't want to deal with the fallout, so I thought keeping quiet was easier. I'm sorry." Alex stood up, pushing his chair back. "Sorry doesn't fix this," he said. He grabbed his coat and turned to Sarah. "Let's go." She hesitated, eyes darting to me, then followed him out the door without a word. The sound of it closing felt final, like something breaking that couldn't be glued back together. Jake sat back down, slowly staring at the table. My mom rubbed her temples, exhausted. No one spoke. The confrontation we'd been avoiding had finally happened, and it hadn't healed anything. If anything, it had torn the wound wider. As we drove home later, the silence between Jake and me felt different than before, heavier, sharper. I stared out the window, thinking about Alex's words. Protecting him. Protecting Jake. Somewhere along the way, I had confused the two, and now I wasn't sure what that said about me or about my marriage. After Alex stormed out that night, something shifted in a way I couldn't put into words. It wasn't just anger anymore. It felt like a line had been crossed that couldn't be uncrossed, like we'd all stepped into a version of our family that no longer fit the shape we were used to. Jake and I drove home in silence, the kind that presses in on you until it feels physical. When we walked through the door, he collapsed onto the couch and ran his hands through his hair. "Well," he muttered, staring at the ceiling that was a disaster. I sat down slowly, not trusting myself to speak right away. My thoughts were too tangled, my emotions too raw. When I finally did talk, my voice came out flat. "You should have told him from the beginning." "I know," Jake said immediately. There was no defensiveness this time, just exhaustion. I really thought I was doing the right thing. I didn't want to hurt him. "But you did," I replied, "and now I don't know how we fix this." The days that followed were tense in a new way. Jake was quieter, more withdrawn. I caught him staring into space, jaw tight, like he was replaying every decision he'd made. I was doing the same, except my mind always ended up on Alex, his face at the table, the disappointment in his eyes. I texted him a few times. No response. My mom called daily, trying to act like a mediator, but even she sounded worn down by it all. Then one afternoon, Alex called me. The sound of his name lighting up my phone made my heart leap and sink at the same time. "Hey," I answered carefully. "Can you come over?" he asked. His voice was tense, strained in a way that immediately set off alarm bells. "I need to talk to you, now." I didn't hesitate. When I got to his place, he was pacing the living room, running his hands through his hair, the way he always did when he was overwhelmed. He didn't greet me. He just handed me Sarah's phone. "Look," he said. My stomach dropped. "Why do you have her phone?" "She left it out," he said quickly. "I wasn't trying to snoop, but I needed to know." His eyes were red glossy, with unshed tears. "Just look." I opened the photo gallery first. My chest tightened as I scrolled. Pictures of Sarah and Jake together, clearly from when they were dating. Smiling selfies. A beach shot. One of them curled up on a couch, too intimate to ignore. "These could be old," I said weakly, clinging to the idea that maybe this wasn't as bad as it looked. "Keep going," Alex said. The messages were worse. Sarah texting her friends about Jake, about how she still had feelings for him. One message stood out, burning itself into my memory. Being with Alex keeps Jake in my life. It's the only way I can handle not being with him. I felt sick. She's using you, I whispered. Alex nodded slowly. Yeah, and she's been lying to both of us. His voice broke on the last word. I had this feeling something was off, but I didn't want to see it. We sat there in silence, the weight of the truth pressing down on us. Finally, I asked, "What are you going to do?" "I don't know," he admitted, "but I can't stay with someone who's only with me because of someone else." He looked up at me, jaw tight. "I'm going to confront her. I need to hear it from her mouth." On the drive home, my hands shook on the steering wheel. The betrayal felt layered now, uglier than before. It wasn't just a secret from the past, it was a wound that had been kept open on purpose. When I got home, Jake was sitting on the couch, flipping through channels like nothing was wrong. "Can we talk?" I asked. He looked up immediately. Of course. I told him everything about the phone, the pictures, the messages. I watched his face carefully as I spoke, searching for any sign that he already knew. Shock washed over him, real and unguarded. "I had no idea," he said, voice low. "I swear, I didn't know." For the first time in weeks, I believed him completely. And that somehow made it worse, because even without intent, his past had still destroyed something fragile and precious. As I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, one thought kept circling in my mind. The truth was finally out, but the damage was far from done. The next day crawled by at an unbearable pace. I couldn't focus on anything work emails. Even the sound of my own thoughts felt too loud. All I could think about was Alex sitting alone with a truth that had gutted him and Sarah, preparing to be confronted with something she could no longer twist or soften. Jake tried to distract himself with chores, cleaning the kitchen twice, reorganizing a closet that didn't need it. Neither of us said much. We were both waiting. When Alex called that evening, his voice was sharp, brittle. "I'm talking to her tonight," he said. "I need to hear it from her." I asked if he wanted me there. He said no, firmly. This was something he had to face on his own. After we hung up, I sat on the edge of the couch phone, clutched in my hand, heart racing, imagining every possible way the conversation could go wrong. Hours passed before my phone buzzed again. Alex's name flashed on the screen. "I'll tell you tomorrow," he said when I answered. His voice sounded hollow, like it had been scraped clean of emotion. "I just need some time." Then he hung up before I could say anything else. I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake, staring into the dark, thinking about how many chances we'd all had to be honest, and how each missed one had led us here. The next morning, Alex finally called back. He sounded calmer, but there was a heaviness in his words that hadn't been there before. He told me everything. How Sarah had tried to deny it at first, how she'd claimed the messages were taken out of context, how she broke down when he showed her the screenshots admitting she still had feelings for Jake and didn't know how to let them go. She said being with Alex felt safe, familiar, easier than facing the truth. She basically admitted I was a consolation prize, he said quietly. My chest ached hearing it. He told her to leave. No screaming, no dramatic scene, just a clean, devastating end. I couldn't do it anymore, he said. I deserve better than that. I told him he did. I meant it with everything I had. After we hung up, I sat there for a long time, letting the reality settle in. The truth had finally surfaced in full, ugly clarity. Sarah was gone. Alex was broken, but no longer in the dark. And Jake, whether he intended it or not, was at the center of it all. That night, I told Jake what happened. He listened without interrupting, guilt etched across his face. I never wanted this, he said quietly. I never wanted to hurt him. I know, I replied. And I did. But knowing didn't erase the consequences. The weeks that followed were quieter, heavier. Alex and I talked more often now, slowly rebuilding something fragile and new. He still wasn't ready to speak to Jake, and I didn't push him. Some wounds need space before they can even think about closing. Jake respected that, though I could see how much it weighed on him. Thanksgiving came and went with careful politeness. We were all in the same room again, but not the same family we'd been before. There were pauses where laughter used to be glances that lingered too long, words left unsaid. And yet there was also effort, choice, a willingness to keep showing up even when it hurt. Looking back, I realized this wasn't a story about a secret getting out. It was about what silence costs, about how protecting one relationship can quietly destroy another. I don't know if our family will ever be exactly the same again. Maybe that version of us is gone for good, but we're still here, still trying, still learning how to live with the truth we were so afraid to face. And maybe that's the only kind of resolution real life ever gives you.